It's Thursday, it's the 30th of July, I almost said June, and it's afternoon tea at 3 with Father Lewis and me. Can you tell I've been practicing? Because I even know what day it is, so that's a good start. It's good to have you here this afternoon on a maybe thunder on the horizon, who knows? But there is supposed to be a storm coming. Let's hope it bypasses the whole of Florida and just goes, it makes its way into the Atlantic and nothing happens. But we are here to discuss the Sermon on the Mount. And so to begin with that, I'm going to start with a bit of a recap from last week, and then the pair of us are going to try and answer a couple of the questions. And if you're trying to find out how many people are on, there are 3 at the moment.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, please do say hello to us so
we know who you are.
Yep. Right, last week we actually got into the text, which we're on week 6 now, or is it week a million? I can't remember.
It
may feel like
yeah.
week a million, but here we are, week 6. So last week we introduced the word flourishing instead of the word blessed or blessed. And we gave it a slightly wider definition than what we're used to hearing. Now, we told you also that this is a huge study. Hi, Bill on YouTube, and hi, Karen on Facebook. That this is a huge study and it will make demands on you. Father Lewis began with the first 2 verses of chapter 5 and spoke of how these 2 verses of the Sermon on the Mount are foundational. Hi, oh, this is Kit. Yes, hi, Kit. So that's what we're using the word flourishing. It's a huge study, will make demands. And the first 2 verses, when Jesus goes up the mount and sits down, are foundational for a whole bunch of reasons. Hi, Sue. Hi, Holly. The reasons that kind of a huge reduction in this is that Jesus is the fulfillment of Moses. Jesus is on the mountain, and the mountains are seen to be a place where God speaks and reveals, and revelation requires a proper setting. And so this could well be called the Mount of Revelation. Now, notice that I just mentioned Jesus is the fulfillment of Moses. So Father Lewis went on to talk about how Jesus and Moses are connected. And hello, Pam. They're connected by dreams to do with foretelling their births, the slaughter of innocents, the flight from Israel, the return later at God's direction, Moses' temptation versus Jesus' 40 days of temptation, passing through the River Jordan, the law or the sermon being what Father Lewis rather poshly called an ecclesiological fulfillment. And Moses was seen by the Israelites not just as a lawgiver, but more importantly, as a redeemer and deliverer and a small s savior, at least for the Jews. It may have been, no, he wouldn't be seen as a large s savior, would he? No, just a small s. Jesus incorporates all these roles, but is also the savior, big S, for Gentiles as well. Now, we use the word flourishing because the usual word, blessed, is absolutely loaded with another meaning that distorts what Jesus is actually saying. If you remember, we talked about, how do you put this thing on to make it suitable for a person with, I don't know, there we are. That blessing is normally thought about as a kind of God down thing, whereas this other type of blessing is get on camera, is us observing. Thank you once again. Dun, 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 dun. Bit of music, copyright that, please. So, because we have this mix-up of meanings for the word blessed, and what Jesus was talking about is this horizontal one, rather than this God-down one, we want to use the word flourishing. It has within it, amongst other things, enlightenment, growth, maturity, and a vision. This is the most important part. It's the vision of something beyond in terms of fulfillment, that we look towards a goal. It can include happy and fruitful, but not in the way we would mean happy and fulfilled and fruitful, because both Jesus and his disciples died, and we wouldn't say either of those was a happy ending or fulfilling. Of course, we see those things in a different way as well. But that's then we looked at three of the verses. Yes, is it three? Apart from the introductory verses. Now, since then, we asked you to send any questions you may have, and boy, did you. And so we're going to look at these. Now, the first thing both of us would like of you is when we speak, we try and do things in as broad as we can to give you as many ways in as possible to understand, because this is deep. It really is deep. I don't consider this easy by any stretch of the imagination. But to help us, if you can be specific in your question, would you say that? In what you're asking, rather than ask a question in a broad brush, because we were kind of pondering these questions. Hey Jay, good to see you. Don't often get to sit in. No, you don't. Good to see you. All right. So the first question is this. Pondering on the word blessed in addition to flourishing, especially in the context of being poor in spirit, I thought that deeply contented works for me, also grounded and or rooted and grounded in love. What do you think? What do you think, Father? Well, let's look at this. Blessed isn't in addition to. We want you to get rid of the word blessed from your mind. That's the first thing. We want you to, just, as soon as you see the word blessed, I think it was at the end of last week or the week before when we were doing all the word stuff that we said, we want you to have two things in mind when you see the word blessed in the Bible. Because there's one of two options. There's this God down thing when God blesses something, and there's this relational thing where we look at somebody and see the road they're on is a blessed road. It's going to result in something. It's that Macarism thing, and it's a wisdom philosophical term. It's looking towards a goal, which is God. God gifts us with this. Hi, Father Bill and Diane. Good to see you. And good to see Mike and Jennifer as well. So when like I say, we want you to just think about it for a minute and stop. As soon as you see the word blessed, just stop and say, which version of blessed is being spoken of here? If you can put the word flourishing in there instead, because it's this observation, blessed is the man who, as Psalm 1 says, then this is the better one. Now, the person wrote that I thought deeply contented works. This is a kind of, we both thought this is an interior thing.
Yeah, and it also, I think the word flourishing is an active word.
Yeah.
And deeply contented seems, at least to me, seems to be a static word.
Yeah.
And the Beatitudes are about right action. So I don't know if I would use deeply contented.
The same with grounded in a way. We use it in so many different ways that you're actually planted on the earth, and there's a kind of realism about it. That's pretty good. That you see things as they really are. But again, there's a kind of it's this static. It's kind of a static word, isn't it? It means you're planted, and if you're planted, you don't move, basically. And then rooted and grounded in love is true, but it can cause a problem. I don't know whether we mentioned this last week, but I know when we were arguing about this the day before in our discussions, that I talk about when, sometimes when I ask people how they are, they'll say blessed. And I know their lives are a wreck. And one would want people to move in their lives from it being an absolute train wreck of a life to something that is better. that they wish to move forward. The trouble is, there are some people who don't want to. They actually believe that God has created this situation for them, and thus they must remain content and not be not have an impetus to move forward. There are some people who are ill who just love being ill, for instance. And if Jesus turned up and wanted to lay hands on them, they'd suddenly find the means to run off 100 miles an hour because they're content with where they are. God does not want us to be content, either when we're well or when we're ill, when we have our riches, when we're in poverty. We're on this way of flourishing that Jesus is leading us in, that results in us doing God's will. And that is a journey for everyone, because no one has arrived. Do you think that's fair enough?
Yeah. Yeah.
Grounded in, like I say, as a kind of rooted and grounded in love it's true, but it also it can stop you from moving on if you think you've already arrived. And unfortunately, I've met too many people who have. There you go. I had to stick my tongue out to that. Hello, Paula. Right, next question. As to the verse, blessed are the meek, parenthesis, humble, for they shall inherit the earth. Could you expound a little during your talks about what that means? We actually looked back at our text and we talked a lot about it. So neither of us are sure what you're asking. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah.
As to what we've already said. So if you would like to rephrase or sort of qualify your question a bit more, it will help us to answer it better.
I think this format, which is the only one that we can use right now at this point in 2020, the difficult thing is that when you have a question and you write it down, excuse me, very often, I think,
dog.
very often you, we don't understand the question because we don't have that explanation that usually goes along with people asking a question in a public forum.
Yeah, the interaction's missing.
Yeah.
And this is why we didn't want you to write the questions down, because there's a lag between when we say something, you eventually hear it, you type it out, and then we get to see it.
And we've gone
could
on.
be a minute, could be 30 seconds, and we've already moved on. So we love the questions. Please try and make them as clear to these two poor souls as possible. Next question. Read Matthew 5:3. Father Andrew, you spoke of recognizing our own creatureliness as part of becoming poor in spirit, that we see our connection to the planet. Isn't this what St. Francis urged? Isn't this what we celebrate with our blessing of the animals? To quote the great Winston, big burper of the day down there, the one day when we can all boogie together under the sun. It is, and that is exactly right. But a lot of people don't see it like that. They see this tiered world where there's us and everything else. And we can do what we like with the planet. And there's no connection between us and any other creatures. There's no connection with nature. There's no linkage with us and the universe, because we are the apex creature. And actually, that's wrong. We are the apex. We're not even seen to be creatures. We're just a whole distinct thing. And unfortunately, again, there's a lot of Christians who look that way. So they really don't mind the pillage and rape of the planet because, hey, God's given it to us. So what? So this becoming poor in spirit is part of this opening up to see who we are. And thank you for quoting the dog. Next one comes in a couple of parts. I've been trying to grapple with the disagreement between the pair of us, which the person finds most intriguing. Father Andrew, moi, in your view, Are we the ones in control of whether or not we fulfill the steps, beatitudes, which will lead us to the kingdom of heaven? Do we then help to bring the kingdom of God to earth by living as the beatitudes describe? This is an interesting one because it kind of it moves into that realm of faith that I was talking about, as it's not a quantity of something, it's a gift that we have to work and use. So God gives us faith. You could talk about prevenient grace, you could talk about all other different things. But when we hear Jesus, it's not just an invitation to sort of, now I've got a beard, I can do this, to sort of be all philosophical. Yes, Jesus, I can see where you're going with this. It's very interesting. It's a call to action. And but God gives us that freedom either to sit on our behinds or actually do. So we are in control at that extent. But there's a downside to this because, those who have ears to hear are to do. So have we heard? That's the thing. Because if we have, then we will be in control of moving forward in these steps towards the realization of the kingdom of the heaven. And we've got to remember this, what we're taking in bits and pieces to try and get them into bite-sized chunks is an overarching theme of this wisdom and becoming and flourishing. So here we can hear the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth. If somebody wills something, then it requires somebody to do it. And we, by saying we obey God, that we follow God and love God, are the doers. Then it moves over to the Father Lewis side. And do you want to read that?
Oh, okay.
All right.
Father Lewis, as I understand it, you see the Beatitudes as evidence of what is in the kingdom of heaven rather than entrance requirements, as it were. Then do we get there by accepting Jesus' invitation? Is it by God's grace rather than our actions that the doors of the kingdom of heaven are open to us? Or those people exemplify the Beatitudes bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth? The idea of the kingdom of heaven is paramount to Matthew's gospel and what he sees to be the point of his writing in Scripture. The kingdom which Moses brought about has now become open to the entire world, the Gentiles as well as the Jews. And yes, it's by God's grace. It's not. I think we have to be careful not to lay too much theological coverage on top of Matthew's writing, but it is by our action that we help bring about the kingdom of heaven. That, as St. Francis are supposed to have said, preach at all times, and if you need to, use words. The action is paramount importance. As we go through the rest of the sermon, you'll see that Jesus, when he talks about a particular covenantal position, you should not commit adultery, he adds something to it which makes it even more interesting.
It doesn't make it more prescriptive. It makes it,
No.
He humanizes it more because we think it's a series of actions, external actions, where there's a lot of interior stuff that needs to be done as well.
It's having the right heart for the action, that you do the right thing for the right reason.
Yeah. And finally, and this one got us really going. Read Matthew 5:4. It seems that the act of mourning described here isn't really different from what we do. The difference, it seems, is what we mourn. Through mourning, we let go of things in our lives, whether people, jobs, homes, pets, health. We mourn their loss. In my experience, grief is a gift from God, which allows us to heal and move forward. Isn't it the same here? Excuse me, wow, we've all the burps. We will mourn as we let go of those things that stop us from loving all, back to creatureliness. And God will comfort us in our grief. The longer we live, the more we have lost and had to let go in our lives. The more we mourn, and had to let go of the more we mourn. Isn't the mourning of Matthew a continuation of that process? Yes and no. We know that Jesus wept at the grave of Lazarus, his friend. So we know that if the Son of God, who knows what happens next from an experiential point of view, having come down from heaven, you'd think, it's all right. Stop worrying about Lazarus. He's going to be fine, you know. But he doesn't. Jesus weeps. It's the shortest verse in the Bible. So there's a natural emotional response. But the mourning that's being asked of us here is of a whole different character. As I spoke last week, this kind of mourning is an understanding of we have nothing. See, mourning is the loss of something or someone. This kind of mourning is a recognition of our complete emptiness before God. We were thrashing around for ideas because how we perceive things in the 21st century, the 20th century, has changed so much, even in terms of liturgy. And it came to my mind, and Father Lewis can deepen this because he's the liturgist, is that in the Rite One service, we do a lot of mourning. We know there is no health in us. In the Rite Two, we do a lot of rejoicing. And that's done on purpose. And the Rite One has the kneeling, which is this position of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Meekness, I suppose. And whereas in Rite Two, we stand all the way through most of it because it's the opposite. Help me.
You've gone down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's in the question. And it's the Rite One version here that we're kind of looking for, but it's not. It isn't the same. There is the sense of mourning, but it's not the sense of mourning of something we've lost. It's a sense of understanding our complete lack of anything to bring to God that is ours, apart from our sin. That is our own creation. And the longer we live and move towards flourishing, the more rejoice of the fact that Jesus has set us free. And grief, from my experience, grief isn't a gift from God. It's the healing that comes from grief, which is the gift. I really don't like grief. But I do like what happens as I come out of it, realizing I still love people. In fact, I love the people even more because there's that longing for reconnection with them. But the actual grief itself. And Father Lewis mentioned C.S. Lewis's A Grief Observed, which I read at the time when my sister died, and I thought it was rubbish. I thought it wasn't a grief observed, it was a self-absorption observed. It was that kind of existential, and this is how I feel at the moment, which only a man who had the time to do it, within a particular set of circumstances, could enjoy that time of observation. And then Father Lewis reminded me of
Henry Nouwen.
Yeah. And what was that book called?
A Letter of Consolation.
Excellent book. Yes, there is no health in us. It was removed from Rite One. That was my grandfather's description of Anglicanism in a nutshell. He would beat his breast and say, the Church of England, Anglicanism is a miserable religion because there is no health in us. But it's saying something that is true and very profound and very deep. Now, if none of these answers have done anything for you, you know who to write to. And so you see, we've taken 25 minutes just trying to answer the questions, and we have an hour. So, which means we've had to shorten all the work we did yesterday so we can get some stuff in.
Well, before we go on to look at more of the Beatitudes, we have to realize that the Beatitudes in Matthew are shaped in a particular literary way. And various interpreters have offered different analysis of what these the shape is, or how the Beatitudes are connected. Throughout much of church history, they were seen as a progressive ladder. What I think what Father Andrew likes,
being like an ancient churchy person.
to be climbed. You climb these steps to God. Some Reformed Protestants have emphasized the hungering and thirsting for righteousness as the center. Hans Dieter Betz suggests that the first beatitude is the key about the kingdom of heaven. And the rest of the beatitudes and the sermon itself are a way of working out that first theological statement. Mark Allen Powell sees the first four beatitudes as promising reversal for the unfortunate. That's 3 through 6. And the second four as promising an eschatological reward, that end time reward when the kingdom is fulfilled, that reward which will be to the virtuous, 7 to 10. And then there's a closing statement, 11 to 12. Scott McKnight suggests 3 sets of 3, and personally I like this because it seems like they show the moral themes of the Beatitudes. Humility is the first, 3 to 5. Justice, 6 to 8. And peace, 9 to 12. From a more distinctly literary and structural analysis, we may observe the intentional alliteration in the Greek and the fact that each of the quatrains have exactly the same number of letters.
In the Greek.
In the Greek. So you see, Matthew is really working a form. He's got a literary structure in his head as he's writing this down.
What do they call those Japanese things that is very structured?
Haiku?
Haiku, yes. Yeah.
Is this where I tell my haiku?
Do you want to tell your haiku?
Yes.
He's written a haiku.
I had an experience, and this is the only haiku I've ever really written that I think had any substance to it.
That's a wrong word to use.
But I was living in South Tampa, and this was years ago, and I left my car window open, and a male cat decided that they were going to come in and have an evening in the car, and they peed on everything. So my haiku is: copulating cats, an auto's open window, autumnal perfume. Okay.
Ooh. Graphic.
Yeah, and it was autumnal perfume for a long time. Other scholars have suggested seeing a parallel with the 2 tablets of the Decalogue, with the God-centered focus followed by the relational focus of other people. The first 4 Beatitudes have a vertical inference relating to God, and the remainder are horizontal, relating to others.
Ding, 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 ding.
Overall, it is best to see the Beatitudes as 3 sets of 3, creating a triadic pattern that will be repeated throughout the sermon. So that means that within the sermon, there are going to be these 3 things that get linked together as a specific teaching.
So now we move on to the Beatitude in verse 6. Flourishing are the ones hungering and thirsting for righteousness, because they will be satisfied. Now, I'm sorry. That's Bill. I think he's talking about your cat experience.
Oh.
Yeah, I think.
Yes, I was very, very disturbed.
Yes. Now, in this beatitude, there's something really, really simple and really complex going on. It's simple because we see a hungering and a thirsting for righteousness as being something that most people would want. Yeah. We do want everyone to prosper equally, don't we? We do want all to go without and flourish, don't we? Oh, the fingers. Oh, it's going to get better. But is this really what's being asked here? Now, to know that, we need to take a closer look at the word righteousness. Now, when we do that, things become immediately sticky because in the English, we tend to use two words to describe the one, well, it's one Greek word here. Righteousness and justification are the English words we use. The best we could really do is if we could make a verb out of the main word so as to avoid using the word justify. So we would have to righteous instead. But we don't. So we are stuck with trying to work with two words that differ quite a lot in meaning. Just think about this for a moment. Righteous. What do you see when you hear that word? Justify. What do you see when you hear that word? Are there any similarities or overlaps in them for you? Another part of the problem we have is that the word righteous has often been understood in a 16th century context, a context in a way that's almost been devoid of its original context. And so we need to take a look at that word's origins within the Bible, the word's original context. And because there's some Hebrew involved, see, I can't even say the word Hebrew without messing up. I'll let Father Lewis have at it.
One of the most important concepts in the Sermon of the Mount is righteousness. And in Greek, it's
Dikaiosune.
dikaiosone.
Wow, what's in this?
Yeah.
Powerful.
And the Greek root, didkai, appears 26 times in Matthew's Gospel. Very commonly, this is a reference to the righteous ones.
The righteous brothers.
An important category of people in Matthew. These righteous ones, or disciples, are often put into contrast with other people and things, such as the unrighteous, sinners, the evil ones, and those who are hypocritical and lawless.
And that will come in, that'll be important later.
Yeah.
The hypocrisy.
6 of these, the occurrences of the word didkai, are in the Sermon on the Mount. They include 2 of Jesus' macarisms. Those hungry and thirsting for righteousness. Oh, it's going to be a long day. And those persecuted because of righteousness. The frequency and importance of this root in the sermon makes it easy to see it as an umbrella concept that envisions what Jesus expects of his disciples so that they may enter the kingdom of heaven.
Now just think about that for a sec, because it kind of is leading to an answer of at least one of the questions that were asked. You know, this kind of pointing forward rather than this staticness. Okay.
And many scholars who study Matthew's gospel think that righteousness is one of the 2 main ideas in the sermon and along with it in the Gospel of Matthew. The other one is kingdom and righteousness. And if you look at that first, the first beatitude, the kingdom of heaven is theirs.
Mm-hmm.
Professor Lutz notes that a fleeting title for the whole sermon could be The Discourse on Righteous Living in the Kingdom of Heaven.
Do you think he's German?
I think he might be. I think he might be. Then Professor Tom analyzes the structure of the gospel based on the form of ancient speeches and understands exceeding righteousness as the main theme.
Just think of that level of study to be able to compare and contrast with speeches throughout that world in
Yeah.
different times and places.
And
Sorry.
oh, that's all right. That train just left the station, and yes, exceeding righteousness. Because in later in the sermon, we're going to find out that just keeping the Mosaic law is not enough.
Oh, let's do this again. It's
Keeping the law is not enough. You have to interiorize it. Interiorize?
yeah.
Yeah. And make sure that you're doing the right thing for the right reason.
You be it.
You have to be an embodiment of the law. The central section of the sermon, 5:17 to 7:12, is clearly built on the idea of greater righteousness. Righteousness in relationship to the Torah, righteousness in personal piety, and righteousness in relationship to the world. Again, you see that the three structures as three. Since the time of the Reformation, many have assumed that the Protestant understanding of righteousness in Paul's letter as an imputed legal standing, the courtroom scene, is also what Matthew means. And Father Andrew will talk about that in a few minutes. In the Old Testament, though, the word tzaddik often has the idea of restorative justice.
Restorative.
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 Oh, Lord. If he had said that word, I would have gone, what? What? And it's the word is understood in the context of the covenant with God. The covenantal justice is ultimately God's work of setting the world to right, his saving activity, and through it we are called to participate in this and are the beneficiaries of it. Relatedly, righteousness, both God's and humanity's, is a manner of honor.
Now, you see, again, it's kind of feeding into answering those questions, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's kind of later episodes of stuff.
And following in Jewish religious thought, the word righteous is uniformly seen as a term for man's conduct in accordance with God's will.
So they're not separate, they're intertwined in a very...
Yeah. It has to do with action as well as what we believe.
Now, the example, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, is often interpreted as longing for God's imputed righteousness or the salvation he gives. And again, that's the imputed thing is something I'll be mentioning. But as Father Lewis mentioned, we need to study the Old Testament roots of the idea of righteousness. For when we do, we'll see that the word righteousness, the one word we use, means a far larger and far more nuanced thing than a merely forensic imputation. Now, as a scholar, I like N.T. Wright. He was the former Bishop of Durham. He's a really, really fine scholar, and he tends to annoy most people on every side. A lot of people kind of own him as an evangelical, but a lot of what he writes is not, because he annoys the evangelicals. So I'm a kind of fan, but not so much a fan of how he would appear in his churchmanship. Anyway, he wrote a book that's simply called Justification, dun, 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 in which he begins by defining what a first century Jew would have understood by the terms righteousness and to be made righteous. That is, it's explaining what Jesus and Paul and other speakers in the New Testament text mean when they use the word righteous. As always, as we've heard, it's important to go back to what the original language meant when the authors wrote the New Testament, rather than appeal to definitions that come literally centuries later. Because those later definitions are often flavored by understandings of the time. And they kind of have shifted in meaning to the texts we have in the New Testament. Now, it has to be said that this kind of approach is not popular with American evangelicals. But I think that N.T. Wright has a much better understanding of what the language of the New Testament meant and what the writers wrote than what some of modern theologians think of, and those historical scholars who only look at the medieval period. For example, Luther rejected the New Testament book of James as being inspired by God because Luther had what I'm going to call a one-dimensional misunderstanding, that faith was a mental choice and didn't have to be lived out in righteous actions to be real. Works were not in for Luther. And the reason why he didn't like James is because James talks about works all the time.
And I think you have to see Luther in his context, because he was talking about the kind of works that the Catholic Church thought of as helping alleviate suffering in purgatory, getting you into heaven, things that you could do to buy your way into heaven. And so he was really a polemic against the that kind of formalized understanding of being made righteous, which...
But as is often with the convert, there's a zeal which makes them go to an extreme.
Too far.
Yeah. And we see the kind of ultimate of that in Calvin, in a way. Although because he was a lawyer, he saw it in these judicial forensic terms, which is why we have this kind of court scene of, this man is guilty. Then Jesus comes in front of him and says, yes, he is, but I've taken his guilt upon myself. And we all start singing hymns and stuff. And yes, that's in there. But it's not the only thing. It's a bit like, no, I'm not going to go there, because otherwise it's this rabbit hole, Amondo. Nope, not going to do it. I'm going to go back to my text, which is why we have it. Now, also to be noted is that in the original Greek, what I've mentioned about the English translations as justification, vindication, to be declared righteous, to be made righteous, and righteous, the word itself, they are all part of the same word group. And Father Lewis has already said this, but it just bears repeating. It's yet another word or group of words that you may want to underline in your Bible and say, well, what is actually being said here? Now, the problem is most English-speaking Christians do not understand the core concept of righteousness that first century Jews held and what the language of the New Testament is talking about. And so too many later theologians and Christians often treat justification, the other word for righteousness, as a very different topic, rather than being part of the whole concept of what righteousness represents in the language of the Bible. It's one thing, not two different things.
Another modern problem is that the medieval theologians of justification involve the notion of imputed righteousness, which in itself is not wrong, but Christians who are steeped only in the language of imputed righteousness often ignore the many and blatant commandments in the New Testament to live out righteous acts, such as Paul in Ephesians, stating that we are God's creation in Christ for good works, to live them out. Also, if we don't read the New Testament in Greek and see the English translation justification, we mostly do not realize that the underlying Greek is talking about an entire complex of righteous language. They sometimes misunderstand that righteousness in the New Testament is talking about something that is merely imputed. In reality, we are commanded to live out righteousness and be holy and perfect, and this is not imputed. To put it simply, to righteous is an active verb that better relates what is being asked of us rather than the English word justify. Righteousness in Matthew's terms is a wisdom, ethical understanding of doing. This is counter to, say, St. Paul's theologizing on the term. The Holy Spirit brings us into a relationship with God that imputes righteousness. Yes, Matthew arrives at something similar later in his gospel, but it is centered on the righteousness of Jesus and our following of him. He who has seen me has seen the Father. So, in other words, if Jesus accepts us, the Father does too. Now, we have been over the past couple of weeks talking about specific Greek words, and there's one word, and it seems like it's kind of silly. It's a conjunction, and if you read the Beatitudes, you'll see it. It's the kingdom of heaven, the meek, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. That conjunction for, the Greek word hoti, is maybe better translated as because. So if you read the Beatitudes with substituting because for, you might get a different interpretation of what's going on.
So having done all that, and thank you for the hoti bit,
Hoti.
we'll get back to the verse. Flourishing are the ones hungering and thirsting for righteousness, because they will be satisfied. So within this active verb of doing, of flourishing, of moving and open ourselves to everything that's going on, and we see ourselves wanting to righteous. We want to change all the systems and the things that cause iniquity and loss and judgment and all those other things. And as someone mentioned, talking about John Lewis at this time is a pretty powerful image to have, because that's how he lived his life. What did he say?
Good trouble.
Yeah, good trouble.
Make good trouble.
Yeah, this is that's that active thing. You know, you get involved in doing things. If you see something that is out of whack, it's just not right, then it should burn in you. It should create a hunger and a thirsting to you want to be fed by righteousness. You want to drink in righteousness by doing things which will change you. Because when you do that, you will find yourself satisfied, replete. It brings about its own reward, so to speak, but you're moving along on a continuum to see all these things that are wrong. You've opened yourselves up. You're mourning the fact that you don't have anything. You realize that everything is a gift from God, even the language you speak, even the place where you live. You were born and brought up. But God can use everything, and he opens our eyes to see everything that's wrong. And then he calls us to move forward in our lives, to flourish in these things, which is like plowing a field where it's all rubble and flatness and weeds. But when you look behind, everything's turned over and clean, and the fresh soil's there, and wholesome. We can't do this on our own. It's all a part of a community. But can you see where the word because fits in better than for there, as in the other examples? There's a kind of ergo involved in this, which a for doesn't lead you on into. It kind of keeps you in place, as if that result is a kind of an outcome that is, but anything it is inevitable for. It's like the equal sign, but this is anything but inevitable, because we're warned about the cost of following Jesus, that we will be maligned. John Lewis, you know, we will be seen as the enemy. We will get arrested. We will. People tell lies about us, and the more hungering and thirsting we are, the more that's going to happen. But again, they're built on this recognition of, you know, I who have nothing, being called to be something by God Himself, and we mourn the fact that we have nothing, but then rejoice in the fact that God has given us this gift of faith, this gift of grace to be for Him. It's a horrible term. Onward Christian soldiers marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. It's horrible because we hate military metaphors nowadays, but it has. We are in battle, and there's that truth about it. But we're not just in battle with other people. We're in battle with the forces of evil who try and destroy and corrupt and bend the truth that we have. Can you understand or begin to understand why, just at this point, we would want to backtrack and say, my life was so much simpler before I knew any of this, because there are going to be demands made on me. And, if only we can read them all as if this is the eschatological end when all is brought to fruition through Jesus Christ. Well, yeah, but we're in the now of this, and God is expecting us to do these things now. Yay.
Do you have, excuse me, do you have questions?
Yes. And well, they can write them down rather than put them down, because, yes, don't ask questions.
Because we have 8 minutes.
We do. Gosh. Any, just not questions so much as anything that you think we could try and re-explain or amplify or clarify. Or I could play.
Please ask a question.
Yes, no wonder Bill's sorry. I forgot when the corner and he did ride. Oh, but don't do that. We'll be demonetized for copyright reasons.
Yes.
Not that we get any money for this anyway. There's no fair use in using that song in this context. Does everybody understand absolutely clearly what we've said? I mean,
there will be a test.
well, it certainly will.
Yeah.
There will be. Come the eschaton.
Oh, dear.
Dun, dun, dun.
He's using another one of them big words.
Yes. Now, it's not for everyone, but if you've half an interest in things to do with justification and righteousness, then the N.T. Wright book is a very, very good one to get into. He does write as a scholar there, and so you'll have to read it about 3 or 4 times. Excuse me. But he's one of the few people that actually does go back to original first century sources and even further back to get to those initial understandings of what was being said in the New Testament period. Unfortunately, too many scholars just start off with that kind of medieval 16th century reformational rehash, a lot of which, because they weren't scholars, a lot of these Protestant reformers had zero idea of what had gone prior to their own ideas, which is freaky, scary, really. Ooh.
The silence is deafening.
Yeah. While you all type rapidly for the last few minutes, let's just remind you of what's going on Sunday. As of now, not really knowing what the weather conditions are going to be like, things are going to be as they have been for the last 2 weeks. Service at 10, live streamed on YouTube and Facebook. Then following that, around about 11 o'clock, the drive-through communion. Now, you should be getting the anchor in about 2 hours. It's in a server to be sent out about 5:45. And as part of that, there's an advert for the Spring of Tampa Bay, which is a non-profit that works to house and look after and take care of people who are living in relationships, abusive relationships, and they're trying to get out of them. As you may well imagine, at a time like this, when a lot of people just can't do anything but stay at home, a lot of relationships have not just gone south, but they've gone way south, to the point that a lot of violence is taking place. To that end, the advert in the anchor is asking you if you can provide small things to help the Spring of Tampa Bay. If that is the case, then you can bring them along to the drive-through and drop them off. There will be a box, or Vern will be holding a bag out for you to put them into. For more information, do go to thespring.org and look them up, because there's a whole host of ways that you can help them, including Amazon Smile. All right, two people have written something. Let's read this for the last 3 minutes. Paula, I got pulled away a few times to do more tech, so I caught what I could and quirked a lot of Luther. I'm going to be watching the replay before declaring any goals over the blue line. Okay, thanks for that, Paula. And then Kit, I'm interested in John Lewis, especially at this time. Do you know that Father Lewis's first name is really John? And so he's actually called John Lewis Sly. The more you know again. I wish I could remember the tune for that.
Well, I mean, the thing that I remember is that being carded at the
being arrested.
John Lewis department store in Britain.
Right, John Lewis. I have heard that he believed that if we all lived our lives according to the Gospels, especially the Sermon on the Mount, then we could see the kingdom of God on earth. John Meacham has written a book on this, due out at the end of August. Oh, wow. Hopefully good. Meacham is a historian and devout Episcopalian. That might be worth reading. You remind me of what Gandhi said. I like your Christ. Your Christians, not so much. And
Followers.
Yeah. And the thing he liked about Christ was the Sermon on the Mount, specifically. But yeah, we don't live it. So when somebody from the outside looks at us, they go, why aren't you doing that? Father Bill, I had a friend, somewhat fundamentalist, who translated Macarius as blissed. Interesting. Yes. Not so sure I would sort of... kind of sounds a bit final, doesn't it? I am blissed. I have been blissed. It's not forward-looking.
It feels static, yeah.
Kit, that means I'm interested in 2 John Lewises. You poor thing. If you ever go to England, there's a John Lewis store at which he was almost arrested.
Because I presented them with a credit card, an American credit card, and I hadn't signed it on the back. And, did I get in trouble?
Now, to fill out the story, we've got enough time. I am buying something. I'm buying a kettle because I blew up the kettle that Father Victor had. And Father Lewis is, I can't remember what you were buying, but he was buying some stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm at the checkout here. And about this space, he's at the checkout there. I present an American credit card without my signature on the back. I say to them, it doesn't have a signature in my English accent because in America, they ask for ID. And she just swiped it and gave me it back, gave me the receipt, gave me a bag. Father Lewis is the one with the American accent who gives an American card. They ask him why it's not signed. He explains the same thing as I do, and there's a security guard who's just about ready to drag
Oh
him
no,
out.
she called security. She actually called security on me, and they came up.
Oh, happy memories.
I know. I can get into trouble in foreign lands.
Anyhow, I do hope you've got something out of this. We both hope you've gotten something out of it today. We do enjoy doing this. Thank you for joining us for this hour. Please stay safe. Look for the anchor in a couple of hours, and
Watch the weather.
watch the weather. If anything changes to the point that it could be dangerous for us, then we'll let you know. In the meantime, please keep us in your prayers. I'm going to add strings to this for next week, and we'll see where we go from there. Goodbye and God bless.